Good morning, Shawn. We kind of started talking a little bit before we turned on the mics, but you had brought up something about the short fight and the long fight, and kind of maybe the tribal No, I shouldn't even just say tribal members. Maybe just people in general might not have really asked you the question of maybe why have you chosen to be in the position that you're in. I guess you didn't really choose it. You chose that direction, and you got voted in. So in a way, the people chose. But kind of maybe kind of tell me a little bit more about where you were going with that.
All right. Well, you know, I think let's go back to the question in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
Native American tribes, society as a whole, right? The time you're in history right now. People need to recognize, first of all, Native Americans really didn't want to be where they're at, right? I mean, that's a no-brainer. These are kind of like the places they were placed. So they have this traumatic trauma that existed, and they're stuck in an environment they didn't want, first of all. Well, part of the big plan was to make them become like the average American citizen, but they never gave them the tools to do it. So you have generations of this thinking of, oh, we want you to be one of us, but at the same time, we're not going to give you nothing to help you become one of us. And then you hear the rhetoric on the other side of like, well, we're tired of funding them Indians who are taxpayer dollars, right? So, people hear that also. So there's this assumption that we're like refugees is the best way to put it, right? It's like we're basically these refugees that nobody wants. But at the same time, though, every time you turn around, Utah's a good example, right? Thanksgiving and all these other damn holidays. You don't want your Native Americans, but at the same time, the United States history is quick to point out what Native Americans brought to the United States. It's kind of like part of the threads that weave the fabric of our nation type bullshit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is they want you when they want you, and they don't want you when they don't want you. That's really how you feel as a individual tribal member, right? Well then, as a tribal member, as a Native American, you kind of have the deck stacked against you. There's at one time nobody wanted to be an Indian. Now everybody wants to be an Indian, right? But basically now you have to proof up your Indian ancestry, your Indian blood, right? You're labeled. You have to walk around with your little certificate. Hey, guess what? I'm Indian, right? So there's another weight that sits on your shoulder. So you're classified separate to begin with. So you'll never be part of society. Okay, it's just not possible at this time. But at the same time, though, you have an obligation to, if you don't like something, attempt to make a difference, right? And when you do that, nobody likes change. Tribes don't like change. People in general don't like change, right? And so what happens is people who think outside the box or think beyond the circumstance they're in at this moment, at first they get resistance, Even though people may agree with them, what they don't like is what the future holds. So it becomes kind of a paradigm, right? And it's a complicated discussion, but with Native Americans in general, even though they don't look like they've been paying attention in school or listening, the one thing they have done is listened. They paid attention. It's just they've never figured how to use that knowledge to benefit themselves or their family or their people. So you get into an era that we're in now, right? At one time, we were isolated as far as, the Wasatch Fronts over there and the Ute Tribes over here. The only Indian they saw was the one they saw in the history books, or every once in a while they might see one at the mall or whatever, but they never had a conversation with them, right? There was an assumption that we were over here being crazy and radical, right? And we had assumptions on the other side, too, also, that there are a bunch of crazy idiots over there, too, so it kept us divided. So it created a imaginary barrier, right? It was kind of like, don't go crossing this line, you over there, they're going to, it's not going to be good. Same would apply to them. Don't cross over there and it won't be good for you. Well, technology all of a sudden steps into the picture, right? It's just like this situation. There's people going to hear a comment that they would never get the opportunity, right? But they're going to hear it directly from the person who's commenting. And at the same time, part of my job is to do that too. People don't realize that as a tribal leader, they need to understand I'm a leader for the moment. Right? I'm not a leader forever. I'm not going to do this for the rest of my eternity. Right? My people asked me to do something like you stated. Right? I was elected to better my tribe, to make it, their life better for them, their whole well-being better for them. But to do that, I also knew that I needed to start opening eyes to the outside that, hey, we're not really that far apart. Culturally, we're far apart because, our identities are different. And that brings up an interesting dynamic because, history of the United States, if you ask an average citizen, who are you? First line, I'm an American. Okay, what does an American represent, right? They might say, well, I've got Italian blood, I've got Greek blood, I've got Mexican blood, right? And then for us, it's the reverse. We know we're Indian, but we also know our culture, because our culture is still intact, right? We're still connected to something. So we start the conversation with them. Okay, what kind of ceremonies or gatherings? I don't know. I just know I'm Greek. My family. So right there, they're more lost than we are. We may not realize it, but imagine them. Imagine one day if your children ask you, Daddy, Grandpa, Grandma, whatever, so who are we? And they say, well, I'm in, and I'll use Italian just because Italian sounds cool, So they say, I'm an Italian. So the child asks them, oh, okay, so where do we come from? First come Italy. Right. What are our beliefs? I don't know, because they don't know. So that child knows he belongs somewhere, but he really does not connect it to where he comes from, right? He doesn't know how he got to be where he was. All he knows is, I've got an ancestry, but now I'm here. Americans are different. Indians, right? You ask us, who are you from? Where are you from, right? And they'll tell you, this is my mother, my father, my grandparents. What tribe, right? Because it's not even like an Italian, we assume it's just an Italian. With us as Native people, no, there's tribes, there's bands of us, there's different groups of us, and we all know that. And we're reared in that. So what happens is we get staked to our history from the time we're born. From the moment we're born, tradition is started. It just depends to what extent, right? So we're connected. Plus, we're the oldest resident of North America. So, we might be refugees, but we're refugees in our own country. But at the same time, our blood is tied to the land, right? Our blood's tied to what this place is. So you have that. Well, in some ways, that's a benefit, but also it's a disadvantage, right? Because through tradition and culture, there's just some things we won't do, which is not common to mainstream, right? Which could prohibit you from getting a job, which could prohibit you from excelling, it could prohibit you from achieving what everybody thinks you need or everybody around you wants, just because of that. But it's still an individual's choice, and that's the thing, it comes down to the individual themselves. So you take that, right? And so now we know we got these separate cultures, we have these separate ideologies, we have these separate ways of viewing the world, but you're all living in the same world together. And the actions of one impact the other, right? And you can sit by and not do nothing, which tribes have done in the past, right? Or you can choose to start to say something, which you're starting to do as the future moves forward. You have a lot more of these protest type situations because that's become the norm, right? And in my opinion, what happened there was, we can't go earn our feather the way we used to, that we were taught, right? It's become the new mechanism to get your badge of courage, your war scars. So, because they long to be what their ancestors were and what their forefathers were, because they want to be held in esteem by their elders, by their family, and respected. But you're not allowed to do that type of activity in this day and age. So now you've got a group of young people, and you've got some old folks that are trying to basically amend for something they felt they didn't do when they had the opportunity. So, but that applies on the other side of the fence too. You have the non-Indian person who doesn't agree with government, who feels like, this should be more of a democracy, and that's an illusion to say no damn democracy, on paper it's a democracy, but in reality it's not, but at the same time though, you have all these different ideas, all these different approaches, and you've got all these people congregated in a room, and they expect it to become civil dialogue, but it'll never be civil dialogue, right? The United States wasn't built off of civility. I mean, people need to remember how this country became to be, before they basically taken the lands from the Native American tribes. They were refugees themselves. They didn't like where they lived, and they ran. They came here. But what's ironic, and some people get offended by this, and I'm not knocking Mormons. Hey, knock yourself out, Mormons. Knock yourself out, Catholics. All the religious people, but Mormons, because we're in Utah, is a real good point to point out. They run from persecution because of oppression. Yet they become the persecutor themselves in the end. They forget how they came to be. And sometimes you have to remind them of it. And when you do that, some of them catch it, but some of them don't want it, because what it does is it changes their history. Their little stories of we were the pioneers and stuff. All of a sudden the truth becomes, well, maybe you weren't the pioneers. Maybe some of you had intents to be pioneers, but others had other ideas, right? And there were bad things done, bad things that happened. Well, Indian tribes, I think, are a little more developed to, as far as our internal psyche, right? We're more developed to deal with trauma in some ways than a non-Indian. Non-Indians really, if you question, their grandparents' story, I mean, hey, they come unglued, they think the world came to an end, we're an Indian. They might be a little perturbed, but at the same time, okay, well, I wasn't there, I guess, maybe that's possible. So you've got cultural differences, you've got social differences. So you're really, if you take everything I just said, right, you would say, well, then I guess we're screwed. Well, yeah, you're screwed as long as you continue down that road. See, that's the whole thing. The world will never change if you don't attempt to change it. See, so that's where it gets complicated. That's where it becomes critical. And it's not so much you need to change all, but you need to change 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And eventually change, because change comes slowly. Change doesn't happen overnight. And so eventually, and I really don't think it'll happen in my lifetime, but I think, if the planet survives, I think, there'll be a time where Native Americans and Americans in general and other people of other nationalities will better embrace each other for what they bring to the table. And, and you might have a time where, we will thrive as a society. But, until then, we've got battle lines drawn. We've got our defenses up. We've got our, we're ready for a fight, more or less, and then you have shifts in political power, right? I mean, for the Trump supporters, hey, knock yourself out, right? For the ones anti-Trump, knock yourself out. But the simple fact is, it is what it is, right? And that's the mentality I brought when I came to council was, you can cry and criticize the past all you want, and turn around and use that for justification of things you do going forward, but wrong's still wrong, right? So I try to remind our membership, when I talk to them individually or in groups, that, there's been leaders before me that maybe I may not have agreed with, I may not thought that their choices were right, but it wasn't my place to question, because I was not in their shoes. I really didn't have the burden they had at the time. And, and I do that not just to acknowledge what they contributed, but also for people to understand, it's easy to judge me until you have to be me. When you have to make decisions, that have lasting impacts, it's not like that stuff goes away. You live with that. You live with that till the day you die. And here on the reservation, our community is a lot more tight-knit than people realize. Just because we're not shaking each other's hands and saying hello don't mean we don't know each other. We don't know each other's business. Our families are intertwined. One of the worst things you could do as a tribal leader is do something that your people shun you for it, to where you're not able to walk amongst them freely. Where, you go to a powwow, for instance, or a social gathering, and they'll look at you and they won't talk, and you're not welcome. That's a hard life to live, because if you can't be safe here on your own home, right, amongst your people and your relatives, how are you going to feel when you're outside living amongst them with nobody there to help you, because we all need help, right? We all need family. We all need support. Nobody's Iron Man here. It's not like you can do this on your own. There comes a point where you have to have assistance, you know. So that stays in the back of my mind a lot, you know. So a lot of the decision making I do isn't as impulsive as people may think, you know, because I'm not an impulsive person, first of all, right? I was raised in a unique situation to begin with, because I'm a member, but I wasn't a member one time back in my day, because my mom's white, my dad's a full-blood Ute, right? But I'm born and raised here. Imagine in my time that was taboo. I mean, I had to fight to stay alive, more or less. Not that they're going to kill me, right? But it was a fight because I was a half-breed and Numericuts. But at the same time, the full-bloods, not all, were my blood too. So I'm both of them. And what's funny in the end is they may be mad at me, but I'm their reflection. They don't realize it, but they created me. They molded me to become who I am. And so now you're in an interesting situation, because imagine if I use my knowledge and expertise to benefit the non-Indian. Tribal member be upset with me. I use my knowledge to benefit the tribal member because that's who I am, right? Against them. And then they're mad at me. But I always made it was an interesting discussion I had one time with an elder. And I'll share it with you. It's something that makes them think. So you have the elder, he's sitting there and he's talking to you, right? And he speaks you to you, and all of a sudden you don't understand, so he thinks you're below him because you don't speak you, you're not Indian, right? Then he turns around and tells you, you didn't do this and you didn't do that, right? And you sit there and you tolerate it, you know? And then you try to explain to him, yes, you know, but I learned this, I learned that. No, you don't know. But what's crazy is that old person at one time could take care of themselves, fed themselves, they clothed themselves, but there comes a point where they rely on that person coming up to take them. There's a mountain in front of them. They can't walk up anymore, so they need that person to carry them to the top. But the problem is they don't realize it is you belittle these people. You told them they don't belong. So when it comes that time for them to carry you, what makes you think they want to carry you? You created the animosity in them by not accepting them for who they were, because they are what you made them. It's not their fault. It's not that child's fault. Right? That child didn't have a choice. Everybody had an opportunity to help that child become what they wanted to do, but they chose not to. So in that way, we've lost way of what we used to be, because it used to be, when I was a young man, even though I had to fight over being the half-breed and stuff and not a member at the time, I did at least have the family. I had aunts, I had uncles that would always constantly remind me, you know, it's not what they say, it's what we say, you know. They don't need to know you, we know you. But you see society breaking down in this era, right? Our children are alone in ways that we don't understand. We believe that as parents, I'm responsible for them, you know, so we're noble in that. But what we forget, and it's a cultural thing as Indian people, it wasn't just us that raised these children. It was our family, our extended family. It was the community at large, because Indian culture is based off of the group. It's not based off the individual. Because back in the days, you know, when they were nomadic still and had to travel, there wasn't one super Indian who done it all. You know, there were people with expertise in multiple things. People who knew how to hunt, people who knew how to tan good hide, or people who knew how to find medicinal plants. But everything was done for the collective, right? It was done to keep everybody intact and to keep them safe. And so we've always had that gearedness, but modern society teaches the reverse, right? It's about shining. It's about being above the crowd. Everything's about me, right? And you hear in a lot of them cool Indian movies, you know, like, hey, there's no word for me in our language, you know, and it sounds catchy, but in reality, you know, it's true, you know. We as individuals, you know, can't make that person become one of us. It takes all of us to do it. Well, so you've got the cultural fight going there, because you've got the Indian mentality of, you know, it takes all of us to create, you know, to create our children, our leaders, our future leaders. But at the same time, the non-Indian society is just reversed. They've always been me, right? It's me. Now you have a few groups who still embrace the communal, Puritans and Quakers, them guys over, still not using electrical equipment, right? But the bulk of them, they came here for one thing, for themselves. So when there's an opportunity to get something, they took it, and that mentality still exists. So you have all them little things just kind of playing, right? But like I said, they're playing in a direction that don't look good. But at the same time, though, if you're gonna throw your hands in the air, like I said, then it's done, and then you become guilty like them, because then you've lost hope. Me, I'm optimistic, right? I believe that we can overcome this, as a people, not just us as youths, but the other tribes and non-Indians in general. But I think to overcome it, you have to come to the realization that mistakes were made, and you have to acknowledge mistakes, but you also have to acknowledge the real history. You can't sugarcoat this no more, right? You can't put forth this history of the United States and leave out the other part of the history, because until you know the full truth, you'll always make the same mistakes. It's just how the world functions, society as a whole. If you only get part of the map, you'll never find the end of the trail. I don't care how smart you are, you need to know it all. And that's been one of the things that we try to bring forward as tribes, and that's what I try to bring forward, when I talk to people in general, is I'm not sitting here trying to criticize them or whatever, but I am trying to tell them the truth. I'm trying to tell them what I know, so that maybe at least they can put the pieces together and figure things out on their own, because eventually I'm going to be that old man, right? And I may need to walk to the top of that mountain, but I'm able, so I'm trying to make sure that at least I've done everything I can, that when that time comes, somebody will say, okay, I'll help you. But if they don't, that's part of it too. But so I mean, I don't know, and it's hard to explain it to non-Indians, right? And even some tribal members, some Indians, right? They just don't grasp it, because it's easier to be mad, right? It's easier to blame, and it's easier to point fingers and use that as excuses for why we take the actions, because it's convenient. When you actually start thinking about, hey, I have a part to play in this, and how come I'm not contributing? It makes you change, makes you see the world differently, makes you, view the conversation differently, But there again, it's a unique time in our history, and I don't know what the future holds, but as far as me, I still have this mentality, just the way I was raised with. When I die, right, and I share this with people, my vision of death is not like I go to heaven or hell. It's just I get to go back and see my family, right? My father, my grandmothers, on both sides of the family, right? I get to see my aunts. And the first thing is, when I walk through, wherever I walk through, be the hallway or whatever, I can tell just by the way I was raised, they're going to be like, if I didn't do what I was taught, I'm going to walk in with my head down, right? Because I knew better. I was taught better. So I'm going to make sure that as my time gets closer, as I get there, I'm not going to be walking with my head down. I'm going to do everything I can, right, to do what's right. But I also know you can't force people in a direction. So I don't attempt to do that, right? And I don't tell people, hey, follow me. I don't believe that's the role of the leader. The role of the leader, in this situation for me is I'm picking a path, and my path is I'm going to do this for your benefit. And if you agree with me, come with me. If not, that's fine too. And if it works, hey, you benefit. If it fails, I made that choice. That's on me. I'll take responsibility for it. And hopefully we get people who start to view that going forward, and that's where the youth will come in, the generation to come. Maybe they'll better embrace what it means to be a tribal leader or a civic leader, or somebody who represents a broad base of people. But the only advice I would give them is be honest, be truthful. Never tell a lie. Lies are dangerous, because you tell a lie, you have to make another lie to cover the lie, and eventually you can't remember the lie you told before the first lie or the second or third, right? And and then they find out you've been lying all along. I was told a long time ago, tell the truth even if it hurts. You can repeat the truth forever. It never changes, and I've done that, and it's been beneficial to me, because at least somebody can ask me a question, and I can be truthful, because I was truthful when I first talked to them. So,
One of the, as I've gotten older, and growing up, majority of my life here on the reservation down in Randelette, and lucky enough to had known your dad and your parents. I learned, I kind of almost socially that we kind of take it out on our tribal leaders. And as I got older and started to get into more positions where I had more responsibility, whether it was with administration, supervision, amounts of money, decisions that, like you had mentioned, can impact large amounts of people. As I got older, I started to realize, oh, that's why they did that. Oh, that's maybe maybe that's some of the new understanding that I've gained to understand a little bit more of why our leaders do what they do. Because it's easy to just say, oh, you're this way and you're that way, or you did this or you did that, without really understanding the complexity of the position. So now, as I've, I'd say gotten older in my years, I'm really grateful for all the tribal councilmen, regardless of their bands, because I know it is a complex job, and I don't think there's always going to be mistakes. And so as I've grown and gotten to new positions, I've learned like new things. I've been enlightened. You came from what was the department you were over for?
I work for water settlement.
Water settlement, that's what it was. So, but you've always been a conscious person. But when you moved into being a leader, what were some of the things that were new to you that maybe enlightened you as to like, oh wow, this is something that I didn't expect?
I think the work part was what I expected, because like you stated, water settlement, right? Dealt with the government a lot, and while I was in water settlement, was unique was the council at the time, and I think your uncle was the chairman. Right? They put me as a division head over the natural resources of the tribe because they were having problems, So I dealt with culture rights, livestock issues, land issues. I had a big responsibility to basically all the most important internal compartments of the tribe. So I had to deal with stuff because there were issues going on they needed corrected. So I learned all that, right? So that was beneficial. But what I wasn't prepared for was the social side of it. Because, to do the job is easy. Not easy like, hey, everybody can do it. But for me, it was easy, the administrative end of it, the governmental end. That's the easiest part of what I do because of my background. It was the social side of it that was troubling. The real despair, the real hurt, the real, how you put this, but the dire situations that arise that, you just can't foresee that affects the individual tribal member. There's bad things that happen, in the community. There's tragedies that happen. That was probably the one thing I wasn't prepared for. I wasn't prepared for, the person who come in and bare their soul to you and cry and need assistance, and then not being able to help them because of a rule, and that still is hard because it goes back to my early statement. My thing has always been to be truthful, be honest, to comply with the laws the way they exist. But at the same time, you have individuals because of them laws, or rules, they won't get help, but they do need help. So you have to learn how to, deal with that. And the other thing is, you find out things that you didn't want to find out. And now, pretty soon, with what you view or how you view individuals and stuff, it changes also, because in public they could come across as one thing, but in reality you find out that's not them, they've got their disguise on for the world to see, but in reality, and you have to keep that inside you, and some people don't, but I choose to, that's part of the role. So you become kind of a person who takes on all the baggage, and that's why after a while we start looking all dragged out, we get gray-headed, we get all droopy-eyed, and it's because internally, we're taking in all this from our membership, from our people, and we're packing it for them, trying to get them to the end. So that's probably the one thing I wasn't prepared for. But I also wasn't prepared for that some of the people that I thought hated me, and hate's a strong word, but in the way we talk, hate is what it is, right? Nobody going to kill each other. But I was surprised that a lot of people that I thought didn't like me in the end actually liked me more than I realized. But they felt that, I hadn't proven myself. But I had proven myself now. And then all of a sudden the expectation changed. So it's, like I said, it's easy to fight. It's easy to win a battle, even for a council position, and then turn around and just fight with everybody. Because you can always keep your angry people on your side, right? Tricky part is trying to get them all to come together. And that's kind of what I chose. I chose to not just stay here, with a majority and further their cause, but to try to fix all of us. And if I stay here, it's because they still want me to stay here. But if I'm asked to leave, at least I done the best I could for all. So that's kind of a really that for your people who listen to this, they may be like, well, that don't make no sense. And there again, it's like, how do you make sense of it? Unless you've had to do it. If you're given an opportunity, or if you're in a position and you're sitting in the chair I sit in and walking in the shoes I walk in, you'll understand it more. But it is a tough road, but there again, as long as you don't lose sight in what it is you're trying to do, and don't put yourself before the causes you're going after, you can make it through it, But yeah, that's just a hard one to explain to you, Anthony. It's just.
I think you've done a really, really good job, and it's really fascinating. The one of the things by observing, you at work is, and I don't think I've ever really put it into perspective before. And I say this because I don't think, it's not that I don't think that you think about the past or you're not thinking about the future, but you really do stay in the moment. Because I think all of us are most effective when we're in the moment, when we're thinking about all the bad stuff that happened or all the horrible things that could happen, or, that's where a lot of differences and arguments come into play. So when I think, what you've explained, makes perfect sense, and that's really, really fascinating that you were able to identify. Dang, man, look, this is what's going on. How have you adapted to that? What changes have you made to strengthen yourself in that part? Because obviously the administrative and kind of the communication with the administrative stuff has been something that you have a strength in. So how did you adjust for this?
By doing what I wanted leaders to do to me, talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because as a tribal member, what I always felt like was, I can't talk to them. They don't want to listen to me. I'm nobody. Or when I do talk to them, they got the time for me. So I put myself back in being the member. It was like, yeah, I'm a councilman, but I'm one of them also. So I started thinking back, what was it I didn't like? What didn't I appreciate about him? And so I started to do a lot of that. I started to, more or less like, hey, if they come in to see me, yeah, let's talk, but, and that one's tricky because there's times where we're having these meetings, or we got business going. And it's important I'm in there because, I'm going to make a vote or I'm going to make a conversation. And I got this tribal member sitting out here who got here early this morning, and has waited all day to talk to me. So I've got the needs of the whole sitting on one hand, and I got the needs of the one sitting on the other. And basically, you just have to trust your instinct. And there's times where I'm like, well, it might not be in the best interest of the tribe, but it's in the best interest of this individual that I visit with them. So I've done that. I've tried to, like I said, it's like walking in a dark room. There's no way of knowing which way to go. All you can do is trust yourself and trust your instinct and go forward. But whatever choice you make, you can't second guess it. That's another thing. You really got to understand it. Once the dice are rolled, it's not like there's a take back, hey, do over. So, but if your heart's in the right place, and I say that not to make everybody feel touchy-feely, right? But I mean, if you always put your people first and what your objective is, you'll find your way through it. I mean, you'll have to trust them. And people get crazy, but I'm a God-fearing man. I mean, I believe in God, right? And I believe in things above and beyond me, and a lot of people, like, that's a whole new argument. We can get into a religious world with that crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thing is, I was told once before, and where we're at, we're at the tribal office. The leaders of the past are still here.
Mm-hmm.
The people of the past are still here. And I think you get guidance. It's just a matter of keeping your eyes and ears open. I mean, I think we all have that internal help. It's just not all of us have honed it. And that's one thing I think Native Americans have an advantage over most, right? Because it's kind of comical. They still think we can talk to horses and stuff, right? Yeah, I can talk to my horse, my Yamaha four-wheeler, right? Turn it on. But in reality, we do have...
Needs gas.
Yeah. Our senses are different because, like I said, it goes back to how we were raised. We're taught a little different from the moment. We're brought up with your relatives are with you all the time. Your people are with you. You're in the past. So, there's that part of our psyche that's a little more open. You know what I mean? And we've learned to use it because, I think there's been studies, we only use a small percent of our brain. What happened if we use the rest of it, right? I think Native Americans use a certain part. Non-Indians use a certain part, right? But, instinct and knowing what's right is something that's just instilled in you. So to answer that question, that I think that's the biggest thing is, I know what was instilled in me when I was raised, and I understand what a tribal leader represents. I also understand what a male represents, and that's a dynamic I think people don't take into consideration, especially in our culture, right? The male's role is the protector, the provider, right? The female role is she takes care of the family, she takes care of the children. Neither one of them has more importance over the other, right? But together they make a perfect unit. Mm-hmm. So I'm a male, I'm a man, right? So I have that protective responsibility to a member of a tribe. That is part of our culture. So even though the group needs me to be there for the war party, I still have that responsibility as a male and a leader to help the individual whenever given the opportunity. So that's like I said, it's a very complicated situation.
When you think of when you think about the out of the box thinking, where do you think? What is some of the out of the box thinking that you felt that you brought to your position?
The biggest one was to actually go and talk to them directly, because I got heat over that one. Good example is when we first got in office, because I was elected chairman as soon as I got in, and we have this law enforcement issues going on here in the basin, right? Got jurisdictional problems all the time. So you kind of got we got our law, they got their law, and you had crimes and things going on, but because nobody could determine who had authority, we fought, but the criminals basically got away with it, right? So it made this place like the Wild Wild West. Okay, well, early on, state of Utah, that been banging their little war drum, how they'd love to work with the tribe and blah, 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 but the tribe don't want to talk to us. And on our side, previous leaders made choices that, hey, we talked to them, but they don't listen anyway. Give them an inch, take a mile, so the hell with them. We just want to do shit. But I saw, the fight wasn't going nowhere, but I saw the impact to the people. What happens if you have a fire? You have to call on your neighbor to come assist you. What happens if, tragedy happens? You have to call on law enforcement. People don't think about whose jurisdiction it is then, right? All they think about, I need help. You guys should be helping me. So I saw animosity created within both sides, right? And I got friends in Roseville. I got friends in Burwell, Salt Lake, right? And I got my friends and relatives here on the reservation, and they all had these points of views, but they weren't really educated in the discussion, right? They just had this. We had this discussion at our dinner table type speech, and we all figured this out. Well, the problem was I happened to be the guy at the top of the heap who, whatever happens, would foot the burden of it, right? Not just me, but the rest of the council. So we talked about it, and we came to a conclusion that, in the short term, it was better to make agreements than to continue this fight. Because, like I said, what happens if a house started on fire? What happened if somebody was in a high-speed chase, We've got history of what happens, what kind of stuff happens. So we talked about it. What was funny was I thought everybody was on board, but when it came the day to sign the damn agreement, some of the council got scared. They were afraid. Their constituency was like, "You just do that, we're going to kick you out." And me, I still believed it was the right thing to do. And so there was 4 of us that sat back in this room, done it. Talked to the governor, we had a discussion with the man, and we had a candid discussion with the man. So we done it. It kind of gave a little stability, to the law enforcement environment, but it didn't exactly go well with my people, my band, right? Because shortly after that, I got recalled or attempted to recall me. Mm-hmm. But what it did was it brought a discussion that's always been there, but nobody had ever talked about it. Okay. Well, this is, going back to your original question, this is what I was able to bring to them. We were talking like we always talk as Native people, right? In terms that we understand. But we didn't understand what they meant. And they were talking like white people in terms they understand, but we didn't understand. My advantage was I understood both sides. I've been in both worlds. I know exactly what they were saying and what they were saying. So I used that to kind of bridge the gap. And so all of a sudden I started holding meetings, quarterly meetings, information meetings. I'd get chewed on, I'd get yelled at. But then in all that chaos, I started explaining to them, what does law represent? What does this agreement really entail? And I told them, I said, if you would have paid attention and not got so emotionally charged, you would have saw that even though they thought they got one over me, I got one over them because I put clauses in my side of the agreement anyway. Because there was an end goal that needed to be achieved, not just that moment. And as they learned that, they started realizing, and it taught them that there's no reason to be scared of them or the law or the rule, right? We can still enforce our rule, but at the same time, their rule, which is applicable to us, we can understand it. And so what I was able to do was take and be an interpreter in that portion of the discussion. Because, you're a child member, you know how it works around here. You get a bunch of us in that auditorium fighting, boy, we can say all kinds of stuff. You get us out there with a bunch of non-Indians, right? We all of a sudden get mums the word. We don't know shit. We'll sit there and look at them. Then when they're not talking, we'll talk trash about them, right? Well, the same thing happens with them. But where my advantage has been, what I've been able to get our tribe to understand is representatives of us, right? Whoever's representing us are really the in-between man, right? They're the translator or the interpreter. And I made a joke about this one time when I was in D.C. I was telling the congressman, because he wasn't talking to me, he had his aides talking to me, right? He was playing attorney tag, that's what I like to call it. They show up with their attorneys, I show up with mine, right? We sit there like, I'm a stoic Indian, he's a stoic congressman. We look across the room at each other, right? Like, who's got more legal knowledge than the other guy, but it's not us talking. So I was sitting there, and I'd gone to these meetings time and time again. Right? I've been in D.C., been to the Capitol, I've been all over. And I watched the people in power, the decision makers, not talking, but everybody else around them talking. And the problem was, what everybody was peddling may not have really been their agenda, but there was no ownership by them not talking. And I saw that, and I thought, oh, I can see why you have him talk. Because if he says something that you don't agree with or missed it, you can deny it, right? And on the record, you would be accurate. Right? But we're playing the same game with them, right? We're playing cat and mouse. So then, going back to my original statement, before I think we were recording, I was telling you, the thing with me was, I thought, what's the worst thing that happened to me for speaking the truth? They're going to do shoot me, right? They're going to kick me off the reservation. I mean, the truth is the truth, right? It never changes. Sometimes the truth gets you to where you need to go faster. So as time progressed, going back to the story, I was sitting there one time and I walked in, and all the congressmen, and won't mention their names because they got thin skin. You start naming congressmen. But anyway, they were sitting there and they had all their attorneys all lined up. I came in with our attorneys, and I had a few councilmen. And as a chairman, it's my role to start meetings, to have the discussion. I said, let me tell you a story. I said, before we start. I said, when I was growing up, I used to watch these old Indian movies, cowboys against Indians. The cowboy on one side of the fence and the Indian on the other. There was this interpreter. I said, so, cavalry line up over here and the Indians line up over here. And this guy would run over to one side. So he'd go over to the cavalry. What do you want me to tell him? I'd tell him we don't want to fight. So he would ride his horse or whatever and get over to the other side. And they try to express to the Indians what the non-Indians said because they didn't speak the same language, right? So he'd tell them, white man over there, he don't want to fight you. He'd do all the sign language shit, right? What the hell is this guy saying? Right? Oh, right. So they get their little group. Tell them this. So they find somebody in the group. Tell them this. So they tell the white man, tell them we don't want to fight either, but they need to get off our land. So he runs back over to the other side, right? Well, he don't know how to say that, because he didn't understand what they said completely. So he goes, well, they want to fight, and something about the land. And okay, well, we need this. So you had this back and forth, right? Well, in the end, because neither side was talking, you had that middleman who was doing the talking for everybody. All hell breaks loose, right? Arrows fly, bullets fly, right? It all could have been avoided if the two sides could talk, but they never knew how to talk because they spoke different languages. So I told the congressman, I said, the advantage of that is, that ain't now. I speak English and I speak it well, right? I can talk to them, I can talk to you, so, why don't we cut to the chase? Let's quit playing the game. Let's be truthful, let's be honest. And that set in motion a whole different trend, right? So I come back and I was able to basically interpret some of the information I'd gathered while I was in D.C., some of the things I learned, and bring it back to my people, and explain to them in terms they could understand, This is what they really mean, right? It says this, but this is what it means. So pretty soon, it started making sense. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Well, it was like creating a beast, right? Because then all of a sudden, they started realizing, hey, they're not superior to me. They're not that smart. They just say it differently. So all of a sudden, a spark starts over here. I got more professional politicians sitting in that auditorium than I had when I started. I have people thinking outside the box themselves, starting to question and challenge it, and starting to be proactive, being more involved in, like this last vote that was done, right? So that was beneficial, but it was also beneficial on that side of the fence, because in one of the hearings I had, one of my favorite battles was my buddy, the congressman. It was put for the world to see. Them condescending statements to us as tribal leaders like we were little children in the room. And at least me saying, you know what, you're full of shit, I know exactly what the law says. And it changed the dynamic. So now, when I'm out in D.C., they're a little more cautious. It's kind of like, if I'm going to talk to them, they know I know what I'm talking about. I read, I understand. So it's leveled the playing field on that side. and it's created an opportunity on this side because now our membership is engaged in dialogue locally, in the state of Utah, within the counties. So that's been one thing I think I've been able to accomplish. I've been able to accomplish a broader view of the issues at hand and a better understanding of what they really represent, and also let them understand that it's okay to ask a question. It's okay if you don't understand and just say, explain that to me. I said, so, I think that's been monumental for us as a tribe.
Have you followed the situation down in is it San Juan County where the Navajo
The voting one?
the voting one? Have you been following that?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that? And do you think that by observing what they've done down there, is there possibilities for our tribal members to have a voting power in the basin area when it comes to public service?
Yeah, and we've always had it already. That's the thing, One of the things that San Juan County brought out, because it's one of them feel good stories. It gets a lot of press. And go back to, like I said, we're in an era of technology. There's not a kid or an adult around here who knows how to surf the web, right? So all the information they're gathering is coming basically through electronics. So when things like that happen, it kind of gets a broad message across to all of Indian country, right? To all the United States. So one of the things, and it started early on, I try to explain to people, the way you affect congressmen or county commissioners is by challenging them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can't challenge them if you're not participating in the process. Well, Indians don't want to vote, that's like, no, that's white man business, We don't get involved in that. But since my time in office, right, there's a lot more registered voters than there used to be. Right? There's a lot more people voting. This last go round, or the last, midterm, the big vote, we were giving free bus rides to people, to go to the polling stations. And so what happens, all of a sudden you have a change in the dynamics of the polls. The local, and I don't mean all of them, but the local in general, the reason why the same people stayed is because the same people are voting.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, our tribe starts showing them, hey, there's a group of us sitting over here, and we have a legal right to vote. We're going to start exercising it. That starts making people who sit in positions thinking, oh, now I got to reach out to them, and we kind of started that early on when I think that Dr. Clemens and them first came here. That was a big event when we brought potential congressmen to come here and talk to us in the chamber, and we gave them our support. And what's funny is I think every time we endorse them, we don't endorse people. We support their agenda. We support, that, you're going to do what you say, then, hey, we'll vote with you, right? But we don't give them like oh, there you go, use our name, because there's some legal things and some other things as far as tribes are concerned of how you do that. So I take like the San Juan County thing because, I deal a lot with them anyway. I go down neck of the woods quite a bit because of the Bears Ears debacle, and they have their own little internal things. You got San Juan County as a district, as a block of land, right, which is 10-20% private owned, the rest is federal land, right, small communities. And Navajo Nation in general is spread out through that whole landscape. And it is a third world country out there. There's no power, there's no water, there's a bunch of stuff. But then you get into the hubs of the communities, right? Oh, they're prospering. So Navajos were feeling more or less like, hey, who's representing us? And in Utah, it's been a renowned thing with gerrymandering. The way our districts are designed, it's like putting damn a jigsaw puzzle together. It's kind of ironic how, the electorate is basically created a playing field which serves their purpose. So there again, you had the people who have to live with the consequences being left out. So what happened with San Juan's thing was actually the people finally had gotten to a stage where it was like, hey, I'm tired of being left out, so I'm going to do something. And there again, Bears Ears kind of ignited sparks in ways that people don't understand. But DAPL ignited sparks in ways people understand, right? what they realized is the process, the legal side of it, it is there for all of us, right? It's just a matter of engaging in it. So, you had that Utah, the Nea Bakea, and them guys, they challenged it, because that was the local grassroots thing about the voting, and took it to court. Navajo Nation stepped in, was able to get some legal decisions in favor of them. Pretty soon you have a reshifting of the map. Then you have the local county go to court, more or less saying now racism's on us, right? So it kind of created a interesting discussion, right? So then you had to vote, right? Willie Gray Eyes wins. I think it's Mark Mary Boy wins, and then one of the non-Indian fellers win, right? And just two weeks ago, we were in D.C. or in Denver at the 10th Circuit for court, and they were there too, and they were crying foul, and they have Rebecca Benally, and she represents this group of Native Americans, and so it basically started pitting everybody against each other, right? And that's where it gets dangerous, because Navajo Nation is a good example, right? Navajo Nation is what it is. It's a nation, right? They don't just live in Utah. They live in New Mexico, Arizona, whatever, right? But they have a democracy as far as how leadership is created. And so they have their president, vice president, they have their chapter houses, they have their Congress, all this stuff, right? Well, the same thing applies here, right? We have the individual tribal member, we have the tribal council, the person who's elected to represent the nation. Utah, what I never agreed with was, and I will name this great dingbat because he is good at this whole Rob boy, or Rob Bishop, right? Former school teacher turned professional politician. He is tactical in ways that people understand. Because what he does is he elevates the Indian, as long as they're in his narrative, but he excludes the actual legal body who represents the nation. And his way of doing it is he is good at it because he's smart at it. What he does is he elevates them, and so go back to the TV and stuff, right? Who you see is this brown person, right? And the assumption from the citizen at large is, oh, that's an Indian. And they're saying they don't agree with them, and they agree with them. So it creates things, but they know. But Rob knows for a fact, as a congressman, right, how Congress works, how tribes work. But because he's got a podium, he's able to fudge the narrative, right, and get the populace. So what San Juan County did, and what it done for us, and North Dakota is a good example, voting laws and stuff, is it basically created a little petri dish, right, and it kind of set in motion possibilities for both sides. That's what San Juan County did, right? They're still fighting over it right now. But, it was funny during this last election in North Dakota. I found that comical, right? If you want to vote as an Indian, you got to have a street address. Fuck, we live in a goddamn country that is, right? Goddamn. Turn by the left tree and the big rock. That's where I'm at, right? Because it's our community. That's how. But they start making these rules. And what would happen in the past was the Indian would throw his hands in there, hell with them. But what they showed is, bullshit then, right? You want us to do that? Somebody show up with a map, they'll start making up a damn addresses, right? So I think what you've got is Indian communities as a whole saying, hey, you know what? The day of me just letting you push me down is coming to an end, right? If you're going to throw a hurdle in front of me, I'm going to jump over it, I'm going to crawl under it, I'm going to dig through it, I'm going to blow it up, whatever I got to do, right? But I'm going to start moving. And that's driven more not by the older generation, but by the youth. The youth is more the leading force behind that. Us old guys, and I'm not really that old. I'm old enough, eh? But the older ones still have the mentality, hell with them. That's their way. Let them deal with it. But that group of people is small compared to the group coming up. And so, but they're not interfering. But they're more or less like, okay, you deal with that, right? And so you're seeing the transition, as far as having more control, more say within a community, within a county, within a state, within a district. You're getting more Native American involvement. But I will will encourage people who do get involved in that process. You need to leave your ego at the door when you're having a public debate, right? Because I've been in meeting after meeting, right? And you get, young people who, going back what I said, they think they're earning their feathers by being radical and extreme, right? There's a time for that. There's a time not for that, right? When you're having civil dialogue, that's what it is, civil dialogue. You need to stick to the topics. You need to stick to the discussion at hand, right? Put forth your ideas or whatever. And don't become, just because they treat you rudely, don't become like them. Because if you do that, you're just as bad as they are, right? I mean, remember who you are. Remember what you represent. Remember what it is you're trying to accomplish. Because the world's watching. That's the one thing I tell people. The world's watching. It's not like we're having these little cowboy and Indian fights behind closed doors, right? Everybody's watching. They're watching our mannerisms, our actions, how we're, and they're judging us based off that. And most people in general, if they see a person who's talking to them who's sincere and honest and truthful, they're going to tend to favor that type of discussion over the person who's sitting back there calling somebody a racial name or talking over somebody, So, it's like I said, it's a petri dish. It's growing. It hasn't grown to what it's going to be yet, but it's still, it's in its infancy as far as what it's started. Especially here in Utah, because I think it's an interesting fact that people don't realize that Utah is one of the last states to allow Native Americans to vote, right? That's kind of an interesting part of history, and the public land debate is interesting because Utah, before it became a part of the Union, had to make agreements with the United States government. And they basically adopted the Enabling Act, right? And it's in the Utah Constitution, and it states specifically that they would never pursue or attempt to acquire federal public lands or Indian reservations. But if you watch how the congressional group's been functioning, that's been like the whole agenda from the beginning of time, and that's created our fights with them. Their desire to acquire our lands, now they're having their Sagebrush Rebellion trying to acquire federal land. And so it's kind of funny because, us as Native Americans, we take the word for what it is. If you say you can't do it, that means you can't do it. And for some reason, no offense to all non-Indians, but to the congressmen and people that are in power, apparently they don't have to abide by rules, and they've created a black eye on the state of Utah. And Utah, in general, the world's watching you. I don't think they realize it. Everybody's watching you. And what I'd hate for is good people to get damaged over the actions of a few bad.
I think you're absolutely right. Even nationally, I know there's indigenous people all around the world that look up to the United States' indigenous nations to be like, hey, those nations have really demonstrated what it takes to be sovereign. If you want to be sovereign, act sovereign. And that's not always easy in other countries where military can really, dismantle a community. But also the other thing which you had mentioned that I thought was powerful was, the country is watching, and the country watched just recently that Utah had a vote on some issues, some of them having to do with changing the laws around drugs here in the state. How that surprised a lot of people that the state of Utah voters said we want to see medicinal cannabis on the thing, on the books. Now, I know I've been in some of the council meetings and I've heard people talk about this, and it tends to be a joke and kind of tease about it a little bit. But how does that vote impact the tribe, if at all, or is there going to be anything in the future with that?
Well,
or does it impact us in any way?
See, and that's where you get into the governmental discussion, because state land is what it is, state right, state law, and where we are is under federal law. Federal law is still federal law. Cannabis is still illegal under federal law, right? So from their side, they can challenge it, and it might be hunky dory, and because it's happening in Colorado and stuff, but we're bound by rule, treaty rule, and stuff. So for reservations to all of a sudden jump on the cannabis bandwagon, right? For me, it would be an opportunity, but at the same time, I see it as an opportunity to cut my throat, right? Because every step of the way, they're waiting for me to make a mistake, right? They're waiting for any excuse to take away anything we have if we violate any type of law. So even though that law may be mundane to some, right, in the back of my mind, I know it is a federal law. So, I'm not going to be, hey, let's go create us a hemp farm or whatever, because, my enemies would use that against me. But from the broader view, what happened in Utah is the predominant religion, it doesn't have the stranglehold it used to. And Utah kind of created its own, dilemma, because they were a closed society at one time, right? Nobody wanted to come to Utah, nobody wants to go there, they're crazy. Well, through their own desire for wealth, right? Because that's really what their desire has been, is wealth. They've created all this, come to Utah, land of the recreationalists, right? Come to Utah, greatest snow on earth, come to Utah. Well, the thing is they came. Now all of a sudden you got changes in numbers, right? The guy who came wasn't exactly the guy who went to church on Sunday, right? He's the guy who came from back east and wants to get his taste of the West. And he likes to go have a glass of wine with his dinner on Sunday, right? He likes, and so the culture itself has, when I go out to Wasatch Front, they said the same thing when they were doing microbreweries, right? Shit. I thought Prohibition was getting ready to kick back up, right? The old ladies walking around with their axes ready to break the cakes. But what happened was a larger majority of the population started embracing, hey, you can't force me to live your standards, I want mine. And so it became accepted, right? Well, the same thing I believe will happen with marijuana and hemp, well, technically, hey, I got to be technical. Hemp is what it is. That's industrial, blah, blah, blah. Marijuana, right? And recreational. But anyway, I think there'll come a time where, it'll be like anything else. It'll be like alcohol, You buy it at the store or whatever. But Utah's just hanging on to a cultural, mindset that we're this state of, we do all this and on Sunday we go to church, right? But the population say, now wait a minute, right? That's kind of not us no more. I mean, and there's no reason why you can't have both. See, I think that's where some of the Utahns don't get it is, you have a right to believe any way you want. I mean, that's your freedom, right? But you don't have the right to enforce or to push upon other people your belief system. And I think when they realize that, they'll get a lot further with, the population at large, because that's kind of one of the fights we have with them. Is they like us, but at the same time they want us to become like them, and we've been trying to tell them forever, we'll never be like you, right? But it doesn't mean that we can't get along. And so I think that's part of the stuff that I see happening around here is, but as far as our tribe, like I said, federal law still is federal law, and I don't think that's something that we wouldn't not talk about or possibly say, yeah, but I don't see it coming right away. Okay, so that's the political side. Let's take the cultural side, right? There's no tradition I've ever learned of that uses marijuana. So if I'm a traditionalist, right, how could I agree with something I know is harmful to somebody? See, and that's the part of the discussion that, they don't have to have, but we have to have. Because remember, part of our population isn't just the modern Indian, right? We do have our part that is traditional, that believes in, the traditional belief. And as far as I know, in my upbringing, right, there's no ceremony, there's no special use for marijuana. So, as a tribal leader, I'd have to weigh both sides of the coin, right? But there again, I would at least put both of them statements like I just given you, right? That would be the statement I give to the membership. Is like, hey, there's money to be made on one hand, right? And then you have this cultural identity and this cultural belief system that you say, neither one is more important than the other, but at the same time, though, you better find a balance in it, right? But that decision really needs to come from us, from all. That's not a decision that 6 people make, because that sets in motion something that, like I said, could bring some consequences, could bring some benefits. So,
Well, I think that goes back to what you said earlier, and you demonstrating that, hey, I'm not an impulsive person. It's really easy for someone who might just say, hey, I know there's a lot of money in there. Let's go for it. You know, but by not being impulsive and thinking things through and say, hey, these are things that are, really complicated issues, things that can impact the tribe for a very long time. I think that really goes back to, showing how you demonstrate your ability to be in the moment, make sure you don't do anything, rash, and talk about it with the people. And I really appreciate that. Now, I know I've had you here for a little while, but before we start kind of winding down, I was wondering, is there anything now that what are some of the priorities that the tribe has now that you might be able to maybe give us a little bit of insight on before we start winding down?
I think the biggest problem we have right now is still there are potential land grabs in existence, right? And I think we as a tribe and other Indian tribes are fortunate that we had a shift in Congress, right? We have a little more Native American friendly style Congress coming in, but we still got this 90-day period, right? A lot of damage can be done in 90 days. People who are still after our land are still in charge. So there again, you can win a little fight here and there, right? But you haven't won the battle and you haven't won the war, right? So I think that's still in the back of my mind, and we're still focused on that. Here in a week or so, I'll be in D.C. again just because of that. It's like, the time to celebrate hasn't even come yet. It's more or less like we want to scuffle, right? But these are the dangerous portions of that scuffle. We all know that oil and gas is dropping on the bottom. It's going crazy, right? And that's all due to the national politics. In a tribe like ours, that has impacts on us, because we've been fortunate enough to not rely on federal handouts to provide service for our membership. But oil and gas has been one of the avenues we've done to create, that benefit. So, we got some financial impacts we got to deal with. Plus, we have just the whole social portion of where we're at, what time of year we are in. Wintertime. You have a lot of emergency situations arise. Broken water lines. Snow removal, elders. You got all of them that you got to balance out too. And then, more or less, the other dilemma is that, like I said, it's not so much us that I'm worried about, it's our neighbors. You don't know what craziness is going to come out of them, because it's not like we live in a bubble around here, Their actions have impacts on us too, so, the best way to view it is like we look like ducks sitting on a pond, right? It's nice and calm on top, but on the bottom, our little feet are pedaling 1,000 miles an hour, right? Because there's big issues coming, there's big things happening around us. But we've got to, as the tribal leadership, right, look strong and stable. Because if we look strong and stable, our membership has confidence. And if our membership has confidence, right, we're able to overcome whatever. And so I think that's not just at our level, but at the national level, because they're looking at their leadership, and if their leadership's out of control, they're going to get out of control. So, there's a lot, but for me, in general, there's always important things that need to be done. Healthcare is one of them, right? I'm working on, and all of us work on all the time, trying to find a better way to provide healthcare to our membership. Because, IHS don't cut it for us, that just isn't something that is beneficial to all of us. But, we're kind of stuck with it because of treaty requirements, because of some of the agreements made. But, so we need to learn how to tweak that. Housing's another big issue, Housing is a complicated task because we are in rural America, right? Most of the utilities are provided from non-Indians, and there's still the animosity between the non-Indians and the membership here, so you have to work through that. So you got, healthcare, you've got housing issues, employment's a big one, our tribal members, it's very hard for them to be successful outside the reservation, not because of them not being capable or knowledgeable. It's just that culturally they're not able to fit in. Right? I mean, the truthful matter is, they can work, they know how to work, but when you feel uncomfortable when you're working, right, you just tend not to be there, and they're always going to come home. So that's something we always have to address. And then the opioid epidemic, I mean, that's one that it's everywhere. It's not just an issue nationally, but in tribes a lot, And then you have the drug addiction issues that you have to cope with, right? I mean, so we have probably some of the same issues that everybody has at a national level, or a city level or a town level, but we have different sets of rules we have to abide by to address it. And I think that's where the non-Indian don't realize it is, we didn't create the rules, but, we're bound to, and we're required to stay within the rules. And so, sometimes they think, why aren't you doing something? Well, it's not because we don't want to, it's just, we're bound by specific laws or specific requirement that we can't address it the same way they can. And then our biggest issue is the fact that, we still have the state, more or less, having a paternalistic approach with us. I mean, them crazy fools still think that they're big brother and we're the little child, right? And, until we get a mindset change in the congressional side, the legislative side, that'll be an ongoing fight. I don't think that'll ever go away. But, I mean, that alone probably is one of the more critical ones. And then, of course, we're in litigation. Hell, we might as well just get our own little seat, at the courts, because we're forever defending our rights, defending ourselves. And what's funny is we have to defend this land as a nation against individuals. Right? I can't, as an individual, go and challenge them. It's kind of backwards, right? But they can sure, as one person, cry foul and get me into court. Right? And I have to expend resources and dollars to defend boundaries at the expense of my membership, at the expense of all them things I just brought up. So I find that funny, I mean, maybe if I was allowed to do the same thing, I'd do it to them, but there again, we have a little more respect for their process. We never go into the Wasatch Front or anywhere and try to, determine their politics for them. You don't see us sit on their lawmaker's office trying to say, we have a say of how you manage your resources. So, I think that's one of the biggest fights we'll always have to cope with is that paternalistic approach that, the non-Indian as a body, not the individual, has still thinking, So, one of the things I always tell people is like, it's time to take us Indians off of the mantle. We're not a showpiece no more, right? It's time to let us take our rightful place and let us do what we've always known we could do. But until they allow us, we'll be patient and watch, but we'll always protect ourselves. And that's been one of my biggest goals as a tribal leader is if the opportunity presents itself, I'm going to step through them doors and further what I can for us. But if they're going to continue to fight with me, I have no problem fighting. That's the one thing. Is, people like, you're a good fighter. That's the one thing in me that I love to do. I can continue doing it because it's easy to do that. But like I told the governor one time, living in peace is the hard part, right? That's something you have to work at. And so I think, we as a tribe, have a lot of, things probably stacked against us, but we have a lot of things going for us. And I don't think the future's set, I think we're in a position to determine our future, but I don't believe that we can continually approach it the same way and expect a different outcome. It's like chasing yourself around a table, it ain't gonna change, eventually you have to start, putting aside the old fight and moving on, so there again, and then our time's limited, people need to remember that, I'm actually up for re-election this year, and I'll be here as long as my people allow me, but, if my time's done, it's done, which is the way it should be, but I'm hoping that somewhere in my tenure, right, like I said, I've been sitting there flipping matches in the grass, getting a book of matches, and got at an open field and I'm flipping matches, hoping to start a spark somewhere. And I'm confident, no matter the outcome. If I'm reelected, I'll continue. If I'm not, I'm confident that there's somebody amongst us, who can pick that up and run with it. And then I go back to being what I was before, a tribal member, father, a grandfather, So, but we move on, that's what we always do. Life goes on.
Well, Councilman Chapoose, I want to let you know, it's one of those matches, definitely has resonated with me. I really enjoy the work that you do. Along with with your peers, I want to thank you very much for sitting down, like you had mentioned before, sitting down and talking with community members, and I appreciate this. I know you've got on with other community members. These even got on the Res Radio with DJ LA down there, and I really commend you for that. So I want to thank you for spending some time with me today, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving and holidays.
You too.
All right.